Buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. On behalf of the Committee of Professional Training of WorldSkills America, on behalf of Elcia Maura, today we receive Enrique Nostroza and Mr. Christian Labé from the University of La Frontera from Chile for our monthly webinar of WorldSkills America to speak about on how to transform massive assessments onto digital formats. We have the support of Enrique Julio Romera to translate from Spanish into English. Here we have, in order to make questions, please use the Q&A button and identify your name and country where you come from. You can choose your preferred language through the interpretation icon, which is a globe on the lower right corner of your screen, and you can choose the language of your preference, either Spanish or English. The webinar will be 1 hour long, and after that, we will have 10 minutes for a Q&A session. Now, Mr. Christian and Mr. Enrique have the floor. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. We are in the south of Chile. Thank you for connecting. Along this hour that we will be here with you. We want to tell you our experience. We are an institution of educative IT, who has worked with the Ministry of Education of Chile, and we have supported other ministries of education in Latin America. And through this experience, we have specialized over the last few years in how to transform assessments, traditional assessments, that is to see physical paper and pen evaluations in digital format, into digital format. And I want to do an explanation. Massive evaluations for us, which compared to many of your countries are not that massive, but for us, is covering the universe of students and teachers. Let's go to the next slide. So, I would like to tell you that regarding digital evaluation, and I can imagine that many of the countries where you are have started to follow a general trend to do digital evaluations. The pandemic has almost forced us during 2020, 2021 to move on to evaluate students remotely. But this trend started before. Here you have some examples from the point of view of traditional learning or traditional or standardized learning. The Program for International Student Assessment, which is an international test where many of the countries that participate, it's a rule, it's a standard to compare ourselves internationally. They have incorporated an evaluation modality that has to do with the fact that the students do their tests on a computer, and this is one of the main features of the education systems internationally to move into electronic assessments. And there are 2 international studies that in some countries have developed One is the PI program, Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, and the generic competencies for adults. And this evaluation, traditional, used to be done on pen and paper, and over the last 2 years, it's done on a tablet. This is a clear tendency on where we are going to. And lastly, this has to do an evaluation on the competencies of digital management. We use the digital tools to be able to carry out these assessments. These are the most common international tests that have pushed the transformation into digital formats. I would like to tell you that this tendency in Chile has arrived at the Ministry of Education, who is the evaluator of the system. And particularly, I can tell you that in Chile, all teachers of in our country must be evaluated when they finish their university studies on pedagogy. Basically, the Chilean state wants to be sure that the professors have a good quality, good level, so the evaluation used to be done formally in physical form with pen and paper. They would sit in a classroom and they would do a test. And over the last 6 or 7 years, there has been a change, and the evaluation of these pedagogy students when they become teachers, they are being evaluated. We have been evaluating them digitally, and we have been responsible for digitizing this assessment process. I will tell you a bit more about this later on. This is a change. We're talking about 2017, where this important change took place, at least for the pedagogy students of the whole country. We're talking about between 16 and 20,000 pedagogy students in Chile. We are talking about knowledge of content, that is, they are tested in mathematics and the way of teaching methodology. These are 2 tests in digital format. The other experience that we've been through in Chile has to do with the transformation of a standardized test, which is a compulsory test for several levels of our country, where the Ministry of Education assesses the quality of learning in certain years. This test is called SIMSE, and has been applied during many years, and used to be applied in the pen and paper format. But a few years ago, we were requested to elaborate a pilot digital test. And that's what we did a couple of years ago, which is part of the experience we want to share with you. Lastly, and this is the last pilot we are performing this year, the agency that assesses learning in this country, which is called Quality Agency, they requested if we could organize a pilot test on evaluating the students of the professional and technical students. This is a pilot test we are developing right now, and in October we will have a massive application. Well, here, just to tell you that how we have progressed regarding numbers, and so that you see a timeline. We started in 2013 with the SEALS test with 6,000 people assessed in 2015. Then in 2016, we had a standardized learning test with 1,884 people assessed, and so on and so forth. We grew and we developed our experience on how to digitalize assessment tests. And the largest numbers have to do with the pedagogy students. In 2017, we started with 18,000. Also in 2018, 2019, 2021, we tested last year, then 23,000, almost 24,000 pedagogical students. We also worked with the adult competency assessment, PIAC, and now we are doing this pilot test that we this year, of which I already talked about. Now I would like to explain which is the context when we speak about processes of digitation of tests. Most of you, when you do your tests, when you design your test, you create the reagents, the questions, then you put together a test, and after that, we apply them in traditional format, that is paper and pen. Sometimes you can use some digital tools like Google or Microsoft tools, which they have some digitalization tools. But when we talk about massive assessments, which are more complex, we should imagine such processes in 5 great environments. First, or processes. First has to do with the creation and review of reagents, and we have to create an item bank where this revision of reagents has to be done. It is like when we have an item to be considered in an assessment, we have revised 4 or 5 items before approving this one. So we have to have an item bank. And I'll tell you what example we've had creating an item bank. This makes us have a broad scope of reagents. Once we've got the item bank, we design the instruments. We have to see what aspects we want to measure, how many items on each area of knowledge we want to take into consideration. And after that, we design implementation from the digital point of view. Here we use digital tools, obviously, and through the cloud, because it makes the instrument to be as faithful as possible regarding how the reagents are presented to the users, both teachers and students. Once the systems of the test has been digitized, the new technologies allow us to file our data immediately and to analyze very quickly some aspects which are quantitative aspects, like that is the percentage of answers, etc. But digital systems allow us to analyze qualitative data. And during the presentation, we will tell you how we can do that, and also in the incorporation of other sort of reagents. Lastly, this technology offers us the elaboration of reports, outcomes reports, where we can have these reports automatized with an evaluation in a certain date. We can have the results. We can deliver the results to the users very quickly in an automatized way. So we have these 5 processes that we will develop one by one. Next slide, please. When we think of these 5 big processes, according to our experience, in order to consider the whole assessment, we have to think of an online assessment ecosystem. In this ecosystem, which, regarding our experience, and we have seen this in international assessments as well, these are the processes involved when we want to design massive assessment, digital assessment features or systems. We have to have an item bank. The ideal way to design such banks is that experts or specialists analyze the reagents so that they agree with the content and the form, the desired content form. Then we have to choose, or we do a selection of these items to include them in the tests, the digital tests. Something that has been useful to us has to do, we have designed our own systems. All developments have been done through free software or through internal developments. All these solutions that the quality agency and the Ministry of Education have required have been ad hoc systems. There are some assessment tools which are public who don't allow us to proceed in this way. So we've done our internal developments, and we have had these developments to digitize the tests. Then we assemble the test, and then we have to have cloud servers that will be able to support the connection of thousands of people at once. And after that, the application is cloud-based, and we start analyzing the test. We can do qualitative and quantitative analysis. And lastly, the outcome reports. There are many people involved in the creation of items. We're talking about specialists for the creation and specialists for revision. Then we have graphic designers, content experts, and technology experts in order to develop the application itself. And then we have a support team for the application. Our experience has been so that the application is carried out in a controlled way. Students come into the computer labs, and that's where they respond the tests. They do the tests. We have to ensure that the people who are doing the tests are the ones who are supposed to do the tests. You can imagine a test on paper, with pen and paper, but now they're sitting in front of a computer. Each one comes in with their own ID, and they proceed to take the test. and we have had some experience of tests made at home. And this has to do on how we have to ensure that the person that is doing the test is the one who is supposed to do the test, and not there is no cheating going on. When we're talking about applications, we have to have a support team with technology specialists that make sure that the assessment conditions are the best for everyone and are homogeneous. And finally, the process of correction, there we need a team of people who are also experts to correct qualitative questions, because the quantitative questions are more automatic to be assessed, but the qualitative questions have to be analyzed, and there is a support team to do that. Here I want to show you what the item bank is all about, and tell you that the problem that takes place with the items is that many teachers, and you can have questions that you have used over many years. Some of them you used in some years, some others you use some other years in order not to repeat the same questions. But the item bank tries to compile all this information, and on that basis to choose the items that show the best conditions. The item bank systems in general for these ecosystems are distributed systems. We have a platform where the items and reagents are filed, also the questions and the alternative answers, and this has to be designed in a way that we have a table of specifications. That is to say, I want to evaluate three things in this test, and for the first evaluation, I have to have a certain number of questions. For the second, another number of questions. For the third, another number of questions, so as not to double or to make double or triple work. Then we choose the best items and we keep some others filed for future evaluations. There is an item, a mathematical item here, a math item where we think about the objectives, what we're looking for, the reagents. This is a project that we developed a couple of years ago, where we had to create 800 items for specific tests on our university, which is the Universidad de la Frontera. And we did a distributed creation because the teachers of all professors and teachers in Chile could participate, proposing reagents and items. As I told you, once we have the items prepared, we have an item bank. We start putting together the test. Here we have developed systems that allow the creation in the cloud of setting up these tests with the specifications on how items these tests are going to evaluate. In general, we have developed these reagents, which are closed reagents with alternative answers. But one of the strong points that digital formats have is that we have incorporated reagents that use other media, not only texts. We have some experience, like, for example, short audios for English tests, where the students have to listen to a piece of speech to which they have to respond certain questions. So the possibility that the technology gives us are very broad, and there is a possibility of the students recording their answers in an audio format. This has to do with the digitalization of tests. Let's go to the next one. And here, Enrique Nostroza is going to take the floor, who has designed many of these processes and knows these processes in detail when it comes to logistics and analysis and correction of these massive assessments. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for participating. I want to develop, basically, make a distinction. These are massive tests, which in general require supervision. We have done some trials on tests that do not require supervision, but most of the tests are applied through the Ministry of Education, and then they need revision. And many of these tests require a number of documents, certificates, and etc., which are still printed documents because of legal terminations. They don't allow this to be digitalized, and then we need to transport physical documents. These are applications, massive and supervised applications in general. And there is a number of levels of organization and implementation, which are represented here, which are shown here. I won't describe each of them, but you can see that in the slide. But basically, it's worth mentioning some elements that we have considered, which are critical when at the time of applying these massive assessments. These are applications that have great consequences, but they have some sort of, they produce certain consequences. One of the key aspects is to include a crisis committee. That is to say, a high-level committee of management committee, which not only gathers when there's a problem, but they also gather to prevent problems or issues. And then the network of the application of the test, because these are digitalized tests in general, one of the issues which are always complex is to find the necessary infrastructure so that all participants can take the test. We are not considering right now that the student can take the test at home or somewhere else. So we organize testing classrooms, classrooms to take the test. Nowadays, we are applying one of these assessments, and as an example, when we are talking about educational institutions, the level of infrastructure is not comparable to the application or regarding the infrastructure that we find in certain universities. We have worked with some schools with which were working with Windows 7, which is an old, and other schools that update their softwares daily. So there are processes of enrollment. We have a list of people who are going to participate in a test, and these people pre-enroll to assign them a specific test or a number of specific items that can, and then we can have customized tests in this way. And then we have a database, and we have lots of different experiences. We work on a cloud based system, and we have found translation problems in America. But we have to resolve the problem. So always, it's necessary to always have a parallel system ready to activate it, a backup system, let's say. Last year, we had a problem of that sort, and it took us 15 minutes to change the software, to jump from one software to another so that the students could continue doing the test. So those that supervise the equipment or the devices, and those who revise the cloud application. So we need a technical team supporting this. One of the most important points of those who ask us to produce these digitalized assessments is to lower the levels of anxiety. And we think on monitoring, it is during the examination, but one of the elements is to have monitoring system, previous monitoring systems. So when we apply the test, we have to know how many students have enrolled, and these are aspects that we have to monitor on a permanent basis. And during the assessment process, we have different levels of monitoring, and we generate such monitoring on the basis of the involved computers, and we can know how many computers are ready to be used. And when the students or the participants start doing the tests, we can know how many started to the test, at what point of test they find themselves, in order to do a correct monitoring and to identify what the problem is. And this happens once in a while because the conditions of the places where the tests are applied changed on a daily basis. And we have to maintain the traditional data on how many people have participated, how many tests have been applied, which ones were completed, which not. And we have to have we have to deal with contingencies. In general, we need, when our evaluations with consequences, we have to have a trustworthy register of, or if something didn't work, why didn't it work, on whose responsibility it was. So we had to have each one of the supervisors who are in the room with their cell phones. They can have access to such revisions and files. The next one, please. In general, when talking about closed questions, the correction is quite simple. because we know which are the correct responses, and then we have a psychometric evaluation on trends, etc. A bit more difficult is to evaluate open questions when we do qualitative analysis and evaluations, and for that we developed a process logistics, and we have a group of correct a group of people who are a correction team, a quality correction team, and in general, the correction processes are quite traditional. There is a training phase for these members of the correction team, and after that, we can monitor twice a day to be sure consistency in the process. This, in general, traditionally, that used to be done manually. However, what we've done was to develop a software to do this in a digital way. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. And the software, once all the answers are done in a digital form, we have prepared the logistics or the correction protocol to implement it in the software, so that each corrector are randomly assigned a number of answers, and after that, the software verifies the consistency among those who correct the answers, and you can see where the answer of the participant is, and they apply corrections regardless of the quantitative dimensions that they have to correct in each answer. And then there is a vision of the correction supervisor, which evaluates consistency among the different people correcting the tests, or the specialists correcting the tests. And they also have the productivity data of each specialist correcting the tests. So these are procedures which are performed under pressure, because everybody wants to have the results as soon as possible. So we have to control the productivity of the correction teams, assuring the levels of consistency and quality of the evaluations. Once done, we have the preparation of the test, the application, the testing itself, and the correction. And the last process that we had to apply, it was necessary to create 220 personalized reports for 50 institutions that participated. And each one of the reports has 150 or 200 pages. So the probability of making mistakes, if we do that manually, is enormous. So we have automatized the reports using scripts, and so the Ministry of Education, what it does is to define the basic structure of content that include normally these types of graphs that you can see here, tables, but also an adaptable narrative evaluation, and through a spreadsheet, we organize these associated reports. and the process is quite demanding, not only generating these reports, the generation of these reports, but I have to update the quality control of each of the numbers and each report, because we can generate a typical and traditional report, but there is a number of cases which are different, which we have to pre-identify to be able to revise a specific report. So what we've done last year was to generate an online system that allows us to generate a system of visualization of results where there is a replica on what the Ministry of Education is looking for, and you can see the results in a very didactic way with a series of explanation. And we are reporting different dimensions, the result of the learnings and the participation, the rate of participation, and the most complicated issue was to see that the numbers that we report online are the same that appear reported in the document. Not because we make mistakes in our calculations, but because the programming languages are different, and they have mathematic libraries that work differently, and generate results with two decimal points of difference sometimes. So we have to see how these libraries behave, how the median is calculated, for example. Here we have some recommendations. Christian, the floor is yours again. You're muted. No, here I am. Thank you, Enrique. Okay, the aspects that we would like to talk about is to tell you that when we consider this transformation of assessments into the digital format, as I told you in the beginning, in this ecosystem, we have to have all these different aspects considered and to design them so that they are coherent. We know that in many cases this is difficult, and I want to tell you a little bit about our experience that took us to create this ecosystem at the end. First, we have to digitize existing tests. This is a first approach to be able to understand the complexity of the process, the whole process. And the recommendation, if somebody wants to start to digitize massively massive tests, is to start with existing tests and then transform them in digital interfaces. One thing that Enrique spoke about has to do with the outcomes, the results. We can start with the digitalization of legacy tests, and then the technology allows us to automatize processes, and then to design automatized reports so that this 1,000 reports can be elaborated quickly and with correct data in their content. After that, if this is managed in an efficient way, the recommendation is to incorporate the other services that I told you, which are part of the ecosystem. That is the item bank and the correction systems, which and this will improve the process and gives us a basis for everything that comes afterwards. And lastly, this is a challenge that that implies the whole community working with the assessments, which is the incorporation of non-traditional reagents. For example, the incorporation of simulators, where a student can move around a variable and determine some sort of results. This is being developed. We want to follow that path, but we're developing it right now. And we can also incorporate answers of the students, which is not just a multiple choice or writing a test, but they will be able to record their answers in an audio format. Okay, I hope that we have managed to show you the general process and to tell you about our experience, so that if you can learn from our experience in order to digitalize mass assessments in a systematic way. This is all from our side. I guess we are going to the Q&A session now. Okay, thank you very much, Enrique and Christian. This is one more step into the 31st century. It's fascinating. We have a question from William from INTECAP in Guatemala. What implications implies this new evaluation method regarding the traditional curriculums of each institution? We have to re-adequate those curriculums or what? Or adjust those curriculums? We have just sent a written answer. To begin with, there are two concrete implications. Traditionally, we establish the curriculums as learning processes are to be completed, and when we use different reagents, more complex reagents, eventually it is possible to generate or to establish more complex learning objectives. So the curriculum that had basic learning objectives can evolve to incorporate different learning objectives, which take into account other competencies, for example. And secondly, there is an increasing trend of a curriculum design which is flexible, based on evidence. And if we establish this sort of evaluations, we can do evaluations and receive results more quickly and efficient. So we can do annual cycles that involve annual curriculum revisions based on evidence. These are two implications that I have just named. Okay, thank you. We have a question from René Moises. How do you revise in your platform answers that require that the student types a text? I wrote the answer as well. In general, what we do is that the platform copies the text, the student text, and is sent to two independent correctors. Each correcting specialist, each open question, we generate a qualitative correction, and we train each one of the people correcting this test so that they can assess a grade regarding the evidence shown in the text. And so in the interface, they tell me the options on how I can correct the text written by the students. For this to take place, there has to be a training process. All correctors have to be trained to see which is the grade that corresponds to the evidence shown in the text. Okay, we don't have any more questions in our Q&A. I would like to thank Mr. Christian and Mr. Enrique for this opportunity to develop such an interesting and modern question, which is digitalizing massive evaluations. Oh, we have one more question. Mr. Cuenca from Ecuador, excellent topic. Could you indicate the management of the security of the management of the information and its different components, the security aspect of the whole thing? Okay, we, in general, all this interactive system, when we digitalize tests, all the interaction which is remote with the people, that is through secure digital media that the public institutions have already defined. Regarding the application or taking the test, we have developed a software that blocks the computers. For example, this software is installed in each computer, and the process of responding to the test is through this software, which prevents people from getting out of the system and going for copying texts in the web or things like that. In terms of the correction, the correction software have established levels of security, and we are now enabling remote corrections to do distributed corrections, and we will implement a process which is incorporating random identifying measures to avoid security issues. Now we have a question from Manuel from Costa Rica. It's a comment. I think that reagents must be different to the traditional ones in the sense that they should recreate technical reality. Any comments, Christian, Enrique? I agree. But I would like to contextualize it historically. We agree with that comment. The point is how to start. And the experience has shown us that we have to start step by step. And we have to use evaluations and reagents, which are legacy, and then take a further step to the new forms of reagents that are not traditional. But this is a discussion that exists, that comes up whenever you digitalize massive tests. Okay, now the question from Salvador, Alicia Alvarenga. How do you solve the difference between two correctors when they are evaluating an item? Basically, there is a simple, the supervisor identifies the differences, And there's a third option. If the supervisor doesn't agree with any of the two correctors, there is a meeting to analyze that correction among the three people involved. This can result in a consensus or in dissent. In the case of dissent, you have to go back and revise the question all from the beginning. Okay, I want to complement. In case that a corrector systematically appears with discrepancies with other pairs, what we do is alignment meetings, which is like a retraining on how to interpret the criteria of the item tested. Mr. Manuel Cruz Murcia from Costa Rica asks, there are some studies on minimum environments in a country in order to digitalize tests. Actually, we don't have a standard of minimum characteristics, but there are two types of issues. One is the characteristics of the devices that have to have minimum conditions. And we should have an computing infrastructure in place, and that can be used. The second issue in rural areas is the internet connection. You have to be online, and this is a problem that in some countries have to be verified. Up to what point, to what extent these rural areas have the necessary connection. What we have done is generate centers of testing centers close to these rural places, and to facilitate the transportation of participants to these centers. So the respondents, they move to these centers where the tests are applied.
Desde Colombia.
Sorry, from Colombia, Mr. Miguel Antonio Mantilla Suarez asks, this security system corresponds to the fact that educational institutions necessarily have to implement your software, or in order the application software, we have it and it's supervised. It's comes in a pen drive and you apply it. They have to do nothing. The application team is the one that supervises the characteristics of the testing facility, and we have a testing software as well. And also we have to mention that in many cases we rent computers, so we don't only carry with us the software but also the computers to be able to cover the quantity of participants in concrete cases. From Guatemala, Alfredo Vinicius asks, to standardize contents, do the specialists become correctors rather than teachers, so that the application is efficient? The application of the test or testing is more efficient? I couldn't understand the question. Do specialists become correctors in order to standardize contents so that education is more effective? To apply automatic systems of evaluation can support these training sessions. So there's a dialogue to be able to know what the student is actually teaching and what I'm teaching. If I'm a professor, this is the final objective, applied in a small number of respondents or to a whole country, the students of a whole country. And the qualitative correctors, when we have 18,000 students, we have to have specialized correctors. But when I want to apply a digital evaluation for a class, for example, the corrector is the teacher, it's himself. So I can, when I read the students' responses, I can learn what they have learned. And that is Paula Andrea. He comments, very good topic. The authentication of the evaluated paper. Do you have think of biometrics in order to identify the respondents? We have taken into consideration the use of different biometric markers. However, you want to use the digital, the fingerprint, we have to apply certain software. In general, this is a bit complex. This is more necessary in evaluations which are not massive, where you know who the respondent is. But we are exploring, but we haven't applied yet to massify this type of application because of issues, existing issues, not only at the beginning, but during the application, it is possible of cheating. So there is a lot of dimensions that you have to take into consideration when you apply these tests. So there is a series of institutions that take care of, and sometimes we establish a link with a counterpart in order to supervise. And other systems that require recordings, and we have to verify those recordings. They are generated on the spot. So when the test is finished, we verify if the test is valid or not, because he has been in front of a computer all the time, or if he went away a couple of minutes. This is a field that we are not applying massively. We are just exploring and developing it. Ina from Costa Rica asks, I would like to know how you manage appeals of people who don't agree with the correctors. Is there any opportunity to negotiate results? This depends on the type of evaluation. There is an option that has consequences when it has direct consequences for the participants, and they can be serious. That is to say, determining their salaries, etc. There are legal mechanisms to do appeals, to process appeals. When are massive applications of a different type, you have to take examinations, but the result doesn't have any direct consequences. That is managed at the institutional level. We deliver all the answers, and there is a dialogue between the students and the particular institution where the students actually study. And there is a dialogue established there, but there is not a formal appealing mechanism, because these results do not have serious consequences. Last question from Ecuador. Where do we find a platform to digitalize evaluations? In general, all these evaluations that we have digitalized have been under the request of the Ministry of Education of the quality agency of our country. So they have a restricted access. They're not, is not available in general, but the platform of the item banks and the reports and the correction platform have been our own developments, which are not public, are not freely available. But the evaluation platform, that is to say, the digitization of tests, is both in a free software, which is Lime Survey. All right. On behalf of the education and technical training of WorldSkills Americas, and on behalf of the leaders of our organization, I thank Mr. Christian, Mr. Enrique for these moments during which we have shared such an interesting topic for the WorldSkills Americas. Thank you, Enrique, for your translation. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you next month in a new webinar of WorldSkills Americas. Thank you, everyone.